I want to welcome everybody. This is my name is Ron Weisberger. I'm the director of our BCC Holocaust Center. And thank you very much for coming. I see we have both people from our college community and also from the outside community, which is really our mission of the center, is to do programming for both our college community but also throughout the community. And we've been very fortunate over the years. This is our third year to be able to track people from all segments. And as you probably know, I'm sure you followed the news, this subject, both of the Holocaust and genocide in general, is more important than ever, given some of the things that have happened recently, and sadly, some of the divisions in our country. So our mission is to provide the kind of education for our students and others so that people will know exactly what has happened and what happens when people begin to think in kind of what I call a dualistic way, that some people are evil or bad and they somehow have to be eliminated. That type of thinking historically has not turned out very well, to say the least, and we don't want that to happen in our country or in the world. So as part of our mission, this is a three-part series that we sort of initiating lunchtime series. A lot of our programs have been later in the day, but we decided to have a lunchtime series, and by the amount of people here, that's good. We have two more. We have one in October and one in November. You should have gotten a program downstairs. If you don't, pick it up, and they'll tell you when the other programs will be held. We also we have a very busy schedule for our year, and again, and that schedule will tell us. One of the exciting things we're doing is bringing an art exhibit of a Holocaust survivor, Samuel Back, who is an incredible world-class artist, and we are really fortunate to be able to bring them. We're working together with our BCC gallery and Kathleen Hancock, who's the curator. And that's going to be from the end of October 28th to December 4th. That exhibit will be open to the community. However, we are having a fundraiser on November 1st from 6 to 8 to raise money for our Holocaust Center. This is really our first fundraiser. And again, we have information downstairs, and those of you who are able, we hope you can attend and help support us. In that regard, I want to thank our volunteers who are downstairs. Linnell Dean, who is my assistant, who does yeoman's work helping to arrange this program, and we have a number of other advisors or students. We also get ongoing support from the Jewish Federation of New Bedford. Cindy Yokin is sitting over here, is the chair of the Holocaust Education Committee of the New Bedford Federation. And they've been doing work for years. We work together with them. They're out in the community as we are. And I've been proud to be part of that group. And as I say, the Federation has been supporting us since the beginning, so we really appreciate that. We have support from individuals. We also had support from the Jewish, I forget the name of that group in Fall River, that also has given us, Jewish Alliance has given us support as well. So in any case, we are happy to have this talk. Before we get started, though, I am really proud to be able to introduce our new president, Dr. Laura Douglas, who just joined us in July, I believe, right? Beginning in July. And right from the beginning, she's been very supportive of our center, so I'd like to introduce her.
Well, good afternoon. It's so great to see everyone here today. And I just wanted to take note that today's lecture is so very timely, as Ron pointed out as well. We recognize that hatred is not just something from the past, but it's very much a part of our today. And I'm very grateful that Dr. Offenberger is here today to help us learn about Austrian Jews and their experience with the Holocaust. And I really hope that we will have an opportunity to listen to many good points, but also I'm excited to know that her talk will give rise to the voices of the Austrian Jews and their thoughts and their feelings and their actions. And I think that's so very important, because I think that will enable us to be better equipped when we encounter hatred, and also give us some reasons to pause and think about our opportunity to make a difference in the world today. So thank you very much for being here. Welcome to BCC, and thank you very much, Dr. Offenberger. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Dr. Douglas. We're happy to have you here, and we thank you for your support. Just a very brief introduction for Dr. Offenberger, who is a professor of history and Holocaust studies at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. She has extensive experience in this area, including a PhD from the doctoral program in Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Clark University, which is actually one of the few, maybe the only university that gives a doctoral program in this area. I know they do really good work. Her doctorate dissertation was selected for the first annual Radomir Luza Prize for outstanding work in Austrian history. I know she's gotten a number of other honors. She also worked at the U.S. Holocaust Museum in D.C., and she worked for Facing History and Ourselves, which, by the way, is a group from which we're getting the Samuel Back paintings. So she's had lots of experience in different areas, both in elementary, secondary education, as well as higher ed. Dr. Offenberg's extensive research, both in this country and Europe, resulted in her newly published book on the Jews in Nazi Austria. And she will be speaking on the subject, which is one of academic interest to her, but also, is as she'll mention, very personal. So, Dr. Offenberger.
So good afternoon to everyone. It fills me with great excitement and joy to see so many faces in the audience, particularly to see the faces of my students from the past, and potentially my students of the future. So students from BCC, welcome. And my students from UMass Dartmouth, welcome. To all of the community members that are here from the local community, welcome. To Ron Weisberger, thank you so much for this opportunity to have me here beginning this important series. Thank you for the Holocaust Center that is here at BCC, which makes such a difference to have this important center of learning in this small area of our state. And thank you to President Douglas for having me here and for supporting all of this. It's very important and very nice to have you with us. So, and last but not least, also, I have to give a little thank you and shout out to my mother, who is here, because it's not every day that one's mom also gets to come and be part of these special events. So, we start off today with questions. I always start off with questions. You'll let me know if you can't hear me, either by going like this to one of your ears or making some monkey, some sort of a expression that you need more, okay? And I'm happy to give it. Today we are going to try to get through a lot of material, and I am going to make sure that nobody falls asleep. I am going to make sure that maybe you crack a smile once or twice. I'm surely going to make sure that your heart feels something, and that you leave here with information that you will never forget. You will leave here with stories that you will carry forward. So, some of the opening questions. What are we doing here today? Today I will tell you about two things, two major things. And the first one is about this book and how it came to be. The book, which is here, you'll see in a moment on the slide. This book is a product of about 7 years of writing, another 3 or 4 years of working on finding a publisher, and before that, probably a couple decades of thinking about Austrian Jewish history. Okay? So today we're going to find out not only what's in this book, but how did I write this book? Why did I write this book? Why does a young girl want to write a book? I'm still kind of young, a little bit. But I was younger when I started this. Well, why does an 18-year-old want to write a book about the Holocaust? Okay, so these are some of the questions that we will get through today. So we start here, and this is really where the story begins. With this image, which is now on the cover of the book, but as my mother can attest to, this was not always the plan. Who is this woman? Who is this woman? This is my grandmother. This is my Omi. I never called her grandmother. I never told my friends that I was going home to see my grandmother. I said I was going home to my Omi. What's an Omi? An Omi is the diminutive word for Oma, which is the German word for grandmother. Okay? And so right off the bat, when I was younger, there was something a little bit different. There was something a little bit different about when I went home to my grandmother than when my friends went home to their grandmothers. I went home to my Omi, and she spoke very differently than all of the rest of my friends' grandparents. Her accent was very sick, yes? Okay, so she couldn't get out that th. It was very sick, her accent, very sick. Okay, well, what did I learn from my grandmother? I learned about a thick accent. I learned that her nails were always done very nice. Her hair was always done very nice. And I learned that she liked to cook a lot of food that was not a cheeseburger or anything like French fries or anything American. This was Viennese cuisine. So I learned about this place called Vienna from a woman that surrounded me in my youth. And I became fascinated. I became fascinated with this place called Vienna. Some of you know the song, Wien, Wien, nur du allein, wird die Stadt meine Träume sein. Okay, it's a song, but it embodied this idea of Vienna being this dream world. And that is how it was introduced to me as a child, although I really had no idea that behind that dream world was a very, very dark history. So while I became fascinated with this idea of the cuisine and the music and the style which you can kind of see represented in this image here, I knew nothing. I heard nothing about the days when the Nazis came into Vienna. When they came in and kicked out my Omi, kicked out her daughter, who was blonde and blue-eyed, and forced them to leave. I heard nothing about it. So, of course, as a child, you have questions then, more questions. In my case, the questions did not really arise until 1996, when my grandmother passed away. Okay? So this image that you see here above, this was hanging on our wall. This is not what my grandmother looked like every day. okay? This happened to be a very special time in her life in Vienna, and this was hanging on our wall when I was growing up. But in normal daily life, you know, she was an ordinary woman. And when she passed away in 1996, I was a freshman in college, okay? A freshman at the university, like many of you that I am teaching today and many of you that are here. And I had questions, not so much about my grandmother, I don't think, but questions about myself. What am I doing here at the university? What is it that I want to study? What is it that I want to be? How do I want to treat other people? Why do other people treat some like they are different, like they are not included? How come I don't fit in sometimes? These are real questions. And in that search to find out more about myself, I looked back into my roots and I decided I wanted to go to Austria. I wanted to go there. And so I went and studied abroad in Austria. And this was a moment that changed my life forever. It changed my life forever. And it led to the establishment of this book that you see overhead. My junior year abroad from college, I was studying in Salzburg, Austria. Salzburg is not Vienna. The reason I went to study in Salzburg instead of Vienna was because my father, who had a little bit of insight, thought that perhaps it would be a safer place for me in Salzburg rather than in Vienna for a year. Now, you can make with that what you wish. As an adult, I understand. There is a heavy anti-Semitic presence in Austria today. There is a heavy anti-Semitic presence in the capital of Vienna today. One cannot deny this. And thus, the choice, the decision was made for the 18-year-old student that wishes to go abroad, that she would go to Salzburg in the mountains where The Sound of Music was filmed. Yes. And from there, I said, I love it here. I love the mountains. I love riding my bike to school, but I need to go to Vienna. So the very first weekend, the very first weekend of that we had free as students, I said, I need to go to Vienna. How did I do that? Well, I started off by asking questions. Who do you ask the questions from? Your professors, okay? Your professors, your group leaders. One question to one professor led to another question. And I went from the Salzburg University to Vienna University. And from Vienna University, I went to the Jewish Community Archives. And from the Jewish Community Archives, they said, no, 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 you need to go to the Austrian State Archives. And I said, how do I get there? How do I get there? I don't speak German. And guess what? I figured it out. I asked more questions. I got a map. I pointed to the map. Okay? And the next thing I knew, I found myself in the Austrian archives. And this is a turning point. This is a very important moment because it is this point that I found this Viennese treasure trove, or so you might see. I went into the archive and I looked through a large book, which I now know is called Recht als Unrecht. And in this book, I was told, please look for your name. And so I looked for the name Offenberger, and I found the name Offenberger. The man behind the desk said, please show me your passport for proof. Okay, I showed him the passport. And the next thing you know, he says, come back tomorrow. So I come back the next day, and what did I find? Some of my students know this story already. I was 19 years old, and I was handed a pile of documents this thick, that thick, and they were all covered with swastikas, red Nazi swastika stamps, Heil Hitler at the bottom. This is stuff that you've only seen on the Discovery Channel, right, or on the History Channel. This isn't stuff that 19-year-old young girls hold in their hands. And all of a sudden, I was holding it. And so I knew I had to do something more with it, okay? So to speed up the story a little bit for the sake of time, the next move that I made was to return to the United States, finish up school. I went to the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. I got one internship. That turned into 2 internships. That turned into 3 internships. That turned into grad school. Grad school turned into full-time PhD program at Clark University. And during that time, I was at Clark University. There was a special archival discovery in Vienna. It seemed to be beschert, okay? It seemed to be meant to be. That all of a sudden in 2001, and yes, we're talking back that far, in 2001, that these archives were found in Vienna in a vacant apartment building. We found a whole missing section to the Jewish community archives. And now, as a research student at Clark University, I was granted access to this special collection of materials in order to write and tell the story of Vienna's Jews. So here you can see above me student researches everyday lives of Viennese Jews as the Holocaust neared. This again is an image of my Omi sitting in the Rose Garden sometime in the 1930s. And here I am, a picture from when I was doing some research out in California at the Shoah Foundation. This was a very, very special time, getting to study under some of the best professors in the field of Holocaust and genocide studies. And particularly I would thank Deborah Dvork, who was a mentor to me. And in order to complete a work of some 396 pages, which the dissertation was before it became a book, in order to do this, you need to have sources, and you need to have reputable sources. So that's what we have here. You see above me some of the main archival sources that I used. I used the voices of the people who told me their stories, and I am but a vessel through which they tell their stories. So this book is their stories, not mine. You can see here oral histories, diaries, letters, documents, newspapers. Some people I met with face to face. Others, I watched them speak for hours. I must have watched hundreds of hours of testimonies in California at this Shoah Foundation. Hundreds of hours of testimonies. Of who? Of Jews who fled from Nazi Vienna. And who else? Jews who tried to flee from Nazi Vienna, but who did not make it. You see here, after the Shoah Foundation, the USHMM, which is the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Through the museum, I was able to access these materials from the Jewish community. I will show you some of those very special and rare documents later in the PowerPoint. I also went and used newspapers, contemporary newspapers, Austrian newspapers. Oh, and yes, that's a part of this as well. Again, to all the students, Remember I was 18 and I couldn't find my way because I couldn't speak German? Yes, we remember? Guess what? I had to learn German, and I did. That was another piece of it. I decided I need to learn this language, and it happened in college and after college. And it enabled me to read the documents when they came out, when they were discovered in that apartment house. Okay. So here are some of the very special documents that were found in the archives of the Jewish community of Vienna in 2001. This is a graphic chart that shows Wanderung aus der Ostmark. The Ostmark was the name for Austria once it was taken over by the Germans. And this shows the different departments that people were expected to go through in order to emigrate or leave the country. You can see that it is quite complex. And these are just a couple of other images that I wanted to show you as far as rare archival documents that presented themselves to me in the course of this journey. Now, I'd like to go back to the question of for whom is this story written? For whom is this history written? So you have a little understanding of the journey that I went on to write this book. But who did I write it for? Did I write it for myself? Did I write it to become a professor one day at University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth? Did I write it for the Jewish community? Did I write it for the woman on the cover? Did I write it for my Omi? So the answer to all of these questions, all of these things that I've proposed is no. The answer is no. No. I did not write it for me. I did not write it for my Omi, although she gets to be glamorous on the cover. I wrote it for all of them, for all of the voices of all of the people who I encountered throughout over 15 years of research. Each document that I looked at told a story. It was words of a person who often did not manage to speak for themselves. They never got to tell their story. So how could I put those papers away? How could I let them fall on the floor and not do something with them? I was compelled from 1998, from the first archival documents I saw, until today, to be sure that the story of the Austrian Jews was told in its entirety as completely as possible. And so that is my introduction to you of how this book and why this book was written and why it's important. It's their stories. What you see above here, just so you know as far as context, this is an image from the Holocaust Memorial in Boston, right downtown in the center of Boston by Faneuil Hall. And these are the numbers that are on these glass sort of chimneys. And so the numbers are symbolic of all of the names of all of the people that were lost. Okay. Okay, so now we need to switch gears a little bit and move into the content of this book. What is this book actually all about? That's what you came here for anyways, isn't it? To see what this book was about. All right, well, statistics are always important. For any chapter of history, we need to have the statistics. The name of this book The Jews of Nazi Vienna, 1938 to 1945, Rescue and Destruction. Okay? A very important title. Initially, it was called Rescue and Destruction, blah, 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 but the publisher had their way at the end. So why is it called Rescue and Destruction? Why is it called Rescue and Destruction? Why not Destruction and Rescue? Well, the answer is that this is not a triumphant history. This is not a triumphant history. This is the story of the destruction of a community that once was. This community does not exist any longer. It does not consist of the same shape and form, and it never, ever will. As you see here, there were approximately 200,000 Jews in Vienna, in Austria, prior to the Nazi takeover in 1938. Within the next year or so, you have 100,000 Jews that manage to escape from the Nazi Reich through emigration. They leave. Then, as conditions worsen and restrictions increase, another 30,000 approximately manage to continue to leave from Nazi-occupied territory. And some 60,000, again, these numbers are approximate figures, some 60,000 do not manage to get out. Those members are trapped behind. Very few of them return to Vienna after the war. Very few of the 130,000 that fled across the world decide to return to Vienna. They stay where they are. They do not return to Vienna. Thus, this community is never rebuilt. How could they return? What would be there? Half of a family? What is half of a family? There is no such thing as half of a family. So families were destroyed, thus the community was ultimately destroyed. Here is a map that shows the various routes on which Jews were deported from Vienna. You can see there are the names of ghettos, which you may recognize. Ghettos such as Łódź, Opole, Nisko. You can also see that there are death camps. And you can see that there are places as far as Riga, where Jews from Vienna were sent on transports of 1,000 persons daily, primarily during the year of 1942. In fact, I was thinking of this in preparation for the talk. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with Dr. Viktor Frankl, who wrote the work Man's Search for Meaning. I know my students are, I know some of you are. Dr. Viktor Frankl was on a transport to Theresienstadt in 1942. He was on a list of dismissed doctors in September of 1942, together with Dr. Grabkowitz, whom I did research on in this book. These men were in Vienna between 1938, when the Nazis marched in, and 1942, trying to survive, trying to flee like everyone else. And ultimately, they were forced to get onto a transport and were deported. Frankl survived. Dr. Grabkowitz did not. This is an image from the Opole ghetto. This is in October of 1941, right around the very time when the Germans are prohibiting further immigration from the Reich. And these women are in Opole, and they send this back to the Jewish community in Vienna, together with letters. There is correspondence going back to the community in Vienna, asking, what will be our fate? What are we doing here in this ghetto? What will be our fate? And their fate was to be transported further to the east. It's important that we have this overview and this context of the destruction when we take a closer look at the daily lives of Vienna's Jews. The destruction began in March 1938, but maybe to your surprise, there were also moments of rescue. There were many moments of rescue. And so we need to take a look at how this ties in. Here we have a map which I have made, which brings us some context. What are we talking about here? We need to discuss amongst ourselves. We need to discuss aspects of this history which we can relate to. And therefore, I have circled and highlighted in red the pre-genocidal period of the Holocaust. Persecution, expropriation, expulsion. You can add many, many more to this list. Segregation, isolation, dehumanization. That is one that we will discuss in further detail. But it is all these aspects that preceded the genocide that we learn about and think about today. Deportation, ghettoization, and annihilation. These aspects of the genocide did not happen overnight. There were preconditions that paved the way for the deportations, for the ghettoization, for the annihilation. And so, I believe that it is our job as students, as intellectuals, as human beings, to study the moments in history that we can relate to, the moments that we can change. We can look at acts of persecution today, and we can do something about them. And perhaps we can avoid these preconditions that could lead to another type of genocide. So here we have a map of Austria, and I'd like to go back now and discuss the preconditions that made it possible for those women to be sitting in those barracks in Opole, writing back to the community in Vienna saying, what are we doing here? There were preconditions. These are those preconditions. The first is the invasion of Austria in March 1938. And this is called Anschluss. Anschluss is the German annexation of Austria on the 13th of March, 1938. Here we see an image of Hitler. I won't leave it up on the screen too long. This is the moment when he is sworn in and becomes now the ruler of Austria, as Austria is going to be a part of Germany. So letters written from Vienna at this time are addressed Vienna, Germany, not Vienna, Austria. Austria is gone. It is now part of Germany. So this is March 1938. We have a transition of power. The Austrian people are generally receptive to the German troops entering the country. Again, this is a story in itself, how the Nazis came to power in Austria. Part of it has to do with an underground that had infiltrated the streets and had prepared for this takeover much, much earlier. I'm trying to see if I can speak louder than the man in the next room. Here we see the German troops entering Austria. Some of you are familiar with this. There are numerous, something that stands out to me is the people that I've spoken with who were children, or around 13 at this time in particular. A friend of mine, George Chushka, described to me this sound. So what he remembered about Anschluss is not these men marching through the streets, but the sound of the planes overhead, the sound of those planes swooping overhead. That was how they knew that something was happening. That was how they knew something was changing. And changing, yes, everything changed very, very quickly as soon as Hitler and the Nazi army invaded Austria. Here you can see they reach Vienna. This is on the 15th of March. And Hitler and the party were welcomed. This image is always striking to me, and I'm sure that it looks even better up there. Look at how many people are there in the Heldenplatz. This is a main square in Vienna. It is covered with people. You can see the monuments. People are just hanging off of those monuments. This is an event. This is the moment when this little country gets to become part of a greater empire. Flags are flying everywhere. Nazi swastika flags are flying everywhere within those first few days. And as you see here, not only is Nazism welcomed, but it's mandatory. So if you're one of the good Austrians who doesn't like Hitler, your best bet is to flee as well. The loyalty oath. Yes, men took an oath of loyalty to Hitler, to follow him to the last breath. So this loyalty oath was taken in Vienna on March 15th. This was mandatory. All civil servants have to take an oath of loyalty. So what you are creating here is one public opinion. People are not thinking for themselves in this crowd. There is no room for individual thought. This is one opinion, and that opinion is for Nazi Germany to prevail. What does this mean for the 200,000 Jews who are living in Vienna? What does this mean for them? Of course, some of them are also probably in this crowd, right? Some of them are also probably in this crowd. And when they were given a swastika flag to wave around, do you think they believed in Nazism and did it? Well, they didn't believe in the Nazis, but do you think they shook the flag? Yes, certainly. If you can blend in for a day before you can get out, blend in. The flags were everywhere. The pins were everywhere. If you didn't wear a pin, you were suspicious. So we're talking here about identifying the other. You can't tell what Jews look like, but you can tell who doesn't wear a pin. Just days after the Nazis take over Vienna, they take over the Jewish community offices. They shut down the Jewish community. Here you see the workers being forced to exit. And here you see the leader of the community, Rabbi Löwenherz, who is being forced to write a check for the Germans. Identification and exclusion of Jews begins immediately. Here we can see signs that say Aryans do not buy from Jews. And here, no sign is necessary. There is just a very large Jewish star on the outside of this cafe window. So what does that mean? That means that Jews are being marked. They are being identified. Again, a precursor to genocide, marking these people, labeling them, labeling anybody who identifies with them. Anybody who wants to go into this cafe, if you are friendly with the person, then you are an outsider as well. So this is about creating a movement of insiders and outsiders. When we look at this and we see the Jewish star, or we see here this sign that says Aryans do not buy from Jews, it takes a very general sense. But when I read about Leo Deutsch, Leo Deutsch, he was about 18 years old during this period after the Anschluss, and his parents had a store. And guess what? He had to stand outside of his parents' store with a sign that said, "Do not buy from Jews. Pig Jew, do not buy from Jews." So he had to stand outside his very own store and wear this sign. And do you know what he thought of? Do you know what he thought of while he was standing there? He said, in his memoirs, he said, all I could think of was, I hope that girl that I had a crush on, I hope she doesn't walk by and see me. I hope she doesn't see me like this. And when I read that, I said, wow, I need to put that in this book because that's the human element. That's the real piece of this that we can all identify with. Human beings are just people who want to create, who want and crave relationships with one another. Here we see the university steps. Jews were no longer allowed to teach. They were no longer allowed to go to university. They could not finish their exams. Imagine, some of you guys might be seniors. I know I have some seniors here. You've gotten this far in your academic career, and now nothing. Nothing. You get no credit for it. And here we see some of the most striking acts of physical humiliation and dehumanization. That probably the most important word that I use, dehumanization. These were public acts of persecution in broad daylight. Jews were forced to scrub the streets all over the city. So I have a couple different images so we can see that this was not an isolated occurrence. In various districts around the city, Jews are forced to get on their hands and their knees and to scrub the sidewalks. Now, initially, there was a purpose here, and they were to be scrubbing away the signs of the former government rule. So there had been a movement for independent Austria to resist the Nazis. And so some of these signs had been posted in places. So it was the Jews who would be forced to get rid of these signs. But beyond that initial reasoning, this was really just done as a sport. It was done as a way of making the Germans feel more powerful and a way of identifying who the enemy was in broad daylight. There was an SOS letter that was sent by an anonymous woman to the American consulate in Vienna that said, please, please help us. This woman is begging for pages for someone to please help them. And she documents all of this violence that she sees on the streets. When people were selected for these scrubbing squads, for these work details, people were given a specific sort of, you can see the bucket there. There was a type of lye that was put in there to make it acidic so that it would hurt their hands while they did this. Also, to further humiliate them, they asked women to put on their fanciest fur coats, or maybe to get dressed up in lingerie, and to come outside and to do these details. So this was not about work as much as it was about humiliation. And what was the end goal? The end goal was to frighten the Jews, to frighten them, and so much that they would leave. And they would not leave with their heads held high. They would leave frightened with their tail between their legs and run away and leave all of their things behind. That was the goal. So, how will the Jews respond? How will the Jews respond to this lightning persecution? Many of you have heard the term blitzkrieg. Yes, blitzkrieg. Can I see a nod heads? Blitzkrieg? Yes? No? It means lightning war. This period in Austria, after the takeover, was often called lightning persecution. What happened was 5 years of laws that were enacted in Nazi Germany, one after the next, after the next. It took time to develop all of the anti-Jewish laws. All of those laws that were developed in Germany over 5 years, they hit Vienna in a day. In a day. As soon as Nazi Germany took over Vienna, all of those laws applied. And that meant that there was no place for Jews. So how will they respond? How will they respond? The Jews respond in a number of ways. I will try not to take up too much more time, but I have a little bit longer. Yes. So, how will they respond? One man who I had the pleasure of meeting with, his name was Jacques Huston. He recalled the situation for his family, and it was a big fight. It was a big fight between his mother and his father, because After Anschluss, his father came home that evening and he said, he closed all the blinds, he closed the blinds, and he said, "Pack one bag, we are leaving tonight." And the mother said, "No, I can't do that, we can't." He said, "Pack one bag, we are leaving tonight." And just like that, they had their chauffeur. Yes, they had a chauffeur. They had a lot of money. Money didn't help you. They had their chauffeur drive them to the border. The chauffeur kept the car, drove back, kept whatever else he could. They didn't have anything. They just left overnight. And you know what? They got to Italy, they got through the border, and they got to the United States. Other people, they thought, we should just remain calm. We don't need to be crazy and go and leave everything. This'll blow over. This is just gonna blow over. That was not the right way to think at this time, although very, very common. Other people made the decision to commit suicide. This is one of the darkest chapters of the Viennese Jewish community, and that is numerous individuals commit suicide. And when I say commit suicide, I do not mean that they took their lives on their own, by themselves. No, I'm talking about family suicide. I'm talking about a grandparent and two parents and two children that would all make the decision that rather than stay in this environment any longer, they should all choose death on their own. This is 1938. World War II has not yet begun. World War II did not begin. And people are choosing family suicide. The most common response above all these was to emigrate, to unify and to attempt to escape, not fleeing over the border with the help of a chauffeur, because that's risky, but to go to the Jewish community of Vienna and listen to their advice, listen to their directions, follow the rules, fill out the papers, and hopefully get out of the country. Here we see Jews organizing in an attempt to leave the country. It was an endless wait for papers. Now, what kind of papers am I talking about? What kind of papers? I am talking about visas. I'm talking about affidavits. I'm talking about tax clearance certificates. You must pay all your taxes before you leave Nazi Germany. I'm talking about passports. You have to have a valid passport, except, guess what? Your passport is only valid for 1 year. And once it is stamped with a red J, you are also in a little bit of extra trouble. So affidavits, tax clearance certificates, passports, visas, what else? Oh yeah, ship tickets, train tickets. So this is a lot of lines that people are waiting in, and there's a lot of coordination required. These are more images of these lines and the stress that came with these lines. Now imagine these lines, the queues around the corners of the streets all day and all night. This is an obvious place to go and pick on Jews. There were fights, there were things like this in the streets here. There were also many situations where somebody would wait as long as possible, and then guess what? Right when they got up to the door, we're closed for the day. We're closed. Come back tomorrow. Huh. And what if you were too old? Maybe you could pay someone else to try and stand in line for you. There was no piece of this that was easy. We think about the anxiety and the angst that we have today handling simple situations, and then we look at this. This is 1938. Here you have an image of inside the offices of the Jewish community of Vienna. Distress inside the IKG offices. What is happening here? You have Jews from the Jewish community of Vienna helping other Jews organize all these papers and get away. Okay, here we are. Inside the offices of the Jewish community, emigration questionnaires. The very first thing that you need to do if you want to leave from this country is to fill out a questionnaire. 2,000 to 3,000 persons registered for this questionnaire, registered and filled out this questionnaire daily as soon as it was a possibility after Anschluss. This showed how ready the people were to leave. Almost 120,000 people registered to leave the country. And here, these are some of these actual registration forms that I was able to look at. These are some of the new archival documents that opened up in Austria in 2001. These forms have the typical questions such as your name and your date of birth and all of that, but they also ask you, where do you want to go? So this woman, you can see, is she wants to go to England, but these questionnaires also ask you, what new work are you training for? So everybody had to train to a new profession. If you were trying to go to a country like England, for example, well, guess what? England has enough doctors. They didn't want you in England because you were a successful doctor. What do you think they wanted? They were looking for chauffeurs. They were looking for housemaids. So while these things might seem minor, if you can manage to get out of the country, it's a complete life change. It's a complete change of everything you believe in, a different language, a different profession. These are a number of other documents. These are all archival documents that I got my hands on. These are internal community documents. What that means is that these are people, these are Jews asking other Jews who run this Jewish community. They are asking them for help. What kind of help? They're asking them to help get them out of this country. They're asking them to maybe pay for the ship ticket or pay for the train ticket or help them to expedite their passport, something. And it's the Jewish community of Vienna as a whole that comes together, that manages to help over 100,000 individuals to flee to places all around the world. Now, these people working behind the desks, the Jews working behind the desks, they had the first access to the ship tickets and the money and the visas, but they were giving it to other Jews. So here's that piece of light. Here's that piece of rescue. These people that could have rescued themselves, they didn't. They stayed and they worked for the greater good of the community to get as many out as possible. their efforts were not always successful. Their efforts were not always successful. The Jewish community could only help so many. Up here, you have an image of two people who I worked closely with. I worked closely with the with the niece, would be the niece of Mia Grunberg. Her name was Lisa Grunberg, Dr. Lisa Grunberg, and her entire family's collection. Mia Grunberg was trying to get out. She was trying to get out of Nazi Vienna from 1938 on. She lived there for another 4 years until she was deported to a place called Mali Trostnet with her parents. She was 13 years old when this picture was taken in 1938. On the other side, you have an example of a success of the community. George Jushka, who I just met with last month, is now 93. As bright as a whip, a wonderful man. And here is his picture when he was leaving to get on the ship with his parents in 1939, after his father Fritz returned from Buchenwald, and they together escaped to the United States. The United States was just one of the places to which Jews from Vienna escaped. They went all around the world to any country that would take them. This is an original map that I found in the archives that shows all of the different countries to which they went. I zoom in here a little bit so you can see the exact numbers are circled inside the actual countries. So you can see that 4 people went to Sudan, for example, and 5 went to Malta. Very, very interesting also to think that they made this map by hand. This was made by the Jewish community of Vienna to keep track of their work. These are more documents from the community, again showing the exact statistics of where people were going, to which country, how many to each country, and how many each month exactly, okay? So you can see here that as soon as the community is opened and as soon as there's an option, as many people as possible are trying to get out to any country they can around the world. So I conclude here with a question for you before I take all of your questions for me. And my question is, why do you study the pre-genocidal period in Nazi Vienna? I have discussed with you this afternoon the pre-genocidal period in Nazi Vienna, the steps that were taken before the genocide that enabled the genocide. Why is it important that we study this? We see up here Vienna 1938, the dehumanization of Jews, and we see here a memorial that was made to these people that is standing in the very center of Vienna today on the Albertinaplatz. It's the memorial against war and fascism. So I leave you with this question, and I thank you very much for your attention throughout this talk, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you. Thank you. So the question is, do I know who the photographer was for the picture in which everyone was stunningly... Which picture, if you could... Oh, so I do not, the picture is, the question is about the picture where they're scrubbing the streets, and if I know from where the photograph comes, and I will go back to it here. I believe this is the one you're discussing? This one? Yes, so I just actually received this from the Austrian National Library, but I am not sure who, I mean, it was clearly taken by someone on the outside of this event, or someone who was proud of this event. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Okay, so the question is, how do I plan to further this research and work that I am doing? So my answer to that is, I have a next idea for a book in the making. It has to do with the Czech Jewish community and about neighbors in Czechoslovakia who helped, in Moravia, that helped their Jewish neighbors. So non-Jews that helped Jews while during the Holocaust by hiding their belongings in particular. So I'm working on this second book. Other than that, I teach 4 classes at UMass Dartmouth. I speak whenever I'm asked and given the opportunity. And yeah, I will continue to do this as long as I am healthy and able. Thank you. Thanks. Any other questions? I'm not sure if I can hear you. Okay. And the girl? Yes. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for asking that question. So the question is, George, his father returned from Buchenwald. The question is, how does one return from Buchenwald? This is a really important question, and this is something that I write about in the book. It was one of the pieces of the history that I uncovered, and it's one of, I think, the more striking pieces of all of this. It's a little known fact that before the war began, the Nazi ambition was expulsion. The Jews should leave. There was no plan for annihilation at that time. So, if the correct amount of money was put up for Jews to leave these camps, then one could emigrate, one could leave. If they had their immigration papers in order and they had money, then they could be released from the camps, and then they would have about 2 weeks to get out of the country, get out of the German Reich. Now, this is very common. It's something that about 5 out of every 7 men that were taken into custody in Dachau or Buchenwald in 1938 and 1939 were actually released before the war began. My own grandfather was one of them. He was in Dachau immediately after the Anschluss and then transferred from there to Buchenwald. He was actually on the same transport with the father of George Chushka, with Fritz Chushka. I write about them here together. They both write about their release from this camp in Weimar, being sent down, the Weimar Jewish community helping the men, giving them food, putting them on the train back to Vienna. They go home. They quickly exchange time with their families, which is very unpleasant. While these men have been in the concentration camp, in Vienna, and throughout the rest of Greater Germany, has been the November pogrom has occurred. So that massive destruction occurred while most of these men were gone. When they return home, they are described as looking like skeletons with their heads shaven, and yet they have made it home, and now together, both pieces of the family suffering from different damage come together and have this opportunity to leave. One key aspect of this, however, is that the emigration papers were filled out right away. So the father, Fritz Tschüschka, he filled out the emigration papers early in May, on May 20th exactly, before he was picked up and sent to the camp. So they were already being processed while he was interned, and his family back in Vienna was working to have him freed from the camp. I hope that helps a little. Yes. Thanks. Yes.
How is it that the Austrians were so easily wrapped up in the Nazi movement? How did they sign on? Why were they open to signing on?
Yes. Okay, so this is a very good and important question that could, well, we could go back about 1,000 years to answer the question. The question is, why and how did the Austrians sign on so easily? Why are they so receptive to Nazi Germany? This goes back to the concept of Anschluss, which is really centuries old. Anschluss, which I did not explain, means connection or unification. And as early as after World War I, Austria and Germany wanted to unite. This had to do with the fact that Austria went from being a 50 million strong empire, okay, Vienna being the capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, 50 million strong. It went to both Austria and Germany lose World War I. It shrinks to this teeny tiny little country, okay? And so there was already overtures to link up with neighboring Germany at that time, and it was forbidden. Now, Germans and Austrians speak the same language. They speak the same language. My students ask me this all the time, what language they speak in Austria. They speak German, a dialect, but they speak German. I think that the relationship between the Austrian Germans is very close, and the desire to be together was sort of intertwined. Now, also, there is a history of anti-Semitism in Austria, plus there is the sheer fact that the Austrian army is very little, and the Nazi German army by 1938 was very big. And this takeover did not happen immediately. There were ultimatums that came before that Hitler had given to the chancellor. There's a whole story about how they met in at the Eagle's Nest, his retreat in Berchtesgaden, and discussed, well, you can fight back and be destroyed, or you can let us sort of take over. There's also a story about the plebiscite, a history of a plebiscite, a public opinion poll that was to be taken to see if the Austrians actually wanted to join up with Hitler. And unfortunately, that was all a big propaganda stunt. And when it was time to vote, yes for Hitler or no for Hitler, there was no privacy in the voting box. And they showed you how to vote for yes for Hitler, so nobody could even actually vote no. And then the headlines came out and said 99% of all Austrians vote for Hitler. So really it was about this dictatorship, this totalitarian regime taking over Austria. There was little room for any dissent. I hope that helps. one more question. I'm going to go with a student.
So you said earlier that there's still kind of like a large anti-Semitic presence in Austria. Like, to my understanding, like Austria and most of Western Europe today is a very modern and kind of like forward with like thinking. But how would you kind of describe that type of like sentiment that's still held today?
Okay, so the question is about anti-Semitism in Austria today. I would say that the anti-Semitism in Austria today is latent. It is a latent anti-Semitism. And when I say this, it does not really apply much to the younger generation. So your generation and your idea of, this modern Western Europe, yes, Austria falls under that. And when I go to Austria and I'm there with my cousin who's 35 and we go out, I don't see any signs of anti-Semitism. It is not apparent like that. But there is a latent anti-Semitism in the fact that nobody really talks much about what happened there in the past. There are very few memorials, and there has been very little work done on the part of the Austrians, not the Jews, but on the Austrians themselves to take the responsibility for this. So at the end of the war, the Austrians, they claimed that they were Hitler's first victims. They said that they were taken over violently and had no chance. Now they hid under this umbrella of being a victim for decades, for many, many decades, until the president, Waldheim, was found out to be a Nazi, a former Nazi in the 80s, and then this kind of brought up all of this old history. So the anti-Semitism that is there, I think it is more of a latent type of anti-Semitism, the inability to really come clean with the past. And that is what makes you a little bit hesitant and unsure of what's lurking around the corners. You're welcome. Yes, there are far-right parties in both Germany and in Austria that will come up. But as far as, I think, mainstream, I think it's more latent. I think